Welcome, everyone. My name's Joshua Roosh. I'm a very proud Technion alum. I'm also a member of the Board of Governors of the Technion, and here on Roosevelt Island, I serve as a member of the steering committee of the Jacobs Institute, and I also serve as chair of the visiting committee of our runway program. And so our next panel is titled The Future of Universities and Research. How do universities stay competitive in a changing environment? So I think it's particularly apt to be discussing a topic like this here at Cornell Tech on Roosevelt Island. After all, the notion of two world-class research universities coming together in a joint venture to form a new campus in a third location has to be a very interesting, entrepreneurial, real-world experiment that should provide interesting lessons learned and outcomes for other universities looking to adapt to the changing environment. Our moderator for this panel is my colleague on the Jacobs Steering Committee, Professor and Dr. Susan Davidson. She's an alumna of Cornell, and she is the Weiss Professor of Computer and Information Science at the University of Pennsylvania. Professor Davidson, the floor is yours.
Great, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to invite, as I'm speaking, the panelists to take a seat. And I would like to start by explaining why I'm here, I guess. Some of you might say, what's this University of Pennsylvania person doing? But as mentioned, I grew up in Ithaca, New York. My parents were faculty at Cornell. I adore Cornell. I guess the other connection, apart from being on the steering committee, is that I've had a lot of very successful research collaborations with colleagues in Israel, in particular at Tel Aviv University. So that's why I'm here. It's my pleasure to introduce the other panelists who I think have a very good reason to be here. I will give the highlights. They are also have so many distinctions that it would take forever for me to introduce them. So I'll just give brief highlights. Professor Uri Sivan, he is a renowned physicist, and he's done a lot of work in nanotechnology and quantum physics. He was the founding director of the Russell Berry Nanotechnology Institute, and spearheaded the development of a lot of Israel's nanotechnology programs. He's the president of the Technion since October 2019, so he has endured the COVID part of life. Even with that, he's done a number of innovations in the university, and they are focusing initially on human health, advanced manufacturing, and sustainability. Our next distinguished panelist is Paul Alivisatos, and did I get that okay? Okay. I asked him at breakfast, and I already forgot. He's the president at the University of Chicago. His area is, he's a preeminent scientist and entrepreneur with also research breakthroughs in nanotechnology. His innovations are widely used in biomedicine. And he was, before he became the president at Chicago, he was the executive vice chancellor and provost of the University of California at Berkeley. Our next two panelists, Greg Morrisett, Professor Greg Morrisett, is well known to you. He is the dean and vice provost of Cornell Tech and a member of the computer science department at Cornell University. He did his PhD and his master's at CMU, and then he became a faculty member at Cornell, where he was for about, was it 8 years or so? But then I think he had a brief moment of insanity, and he went to Harvard, of all places, Harvard, where he was a faculty member for 10 years. Before Cornell very wisely hired him back to become dean of the School of Computing and Information Science. And then, of course, he moved into his current role at Cornell Tech. Our connection is we've served on a number of boards, Computing Research Association among them. Our final panelist is Dr. Jeannette M, who is currently the Executive Vice President for Research at Columbia University. I think that Jeannette's role on this is especially crucial because she has spanned academia, industry, and government in her distinguished career. She was, for a number of years, at Carnegie Mellon University, where she served as department chair. She then went to the National Science Foundation, where she was the Assistant Director for Computer and Information Science and Engineering. After that, she became the Corporate Vice President for Research at Microsoft. And then she was hired, again wisely, by Columbia University as the inaugural director of the Data Science Institute. And that led into her current role at Columbia. So in addition to being a distinguished computer scientist, her claim to fame in my book is that we did yoga together when we were at many board meetings, I think, that we served on. So that's my intro to these distinguished people, and I would like to start out our conversation, and I hope it really will be a conversation. I would like each panelist to just have a 2-minute reason for what led you to where you are now, or why are you here?
Am I on? Well, thank you, and thank you for all those beautiful introductions. It's really fun to be on a panel like this. It's a very diverse group of people, so this should be really interesting. There are 2 things I'll say about why I think I'm here. One is I really do think that the great universities have a distinctive style and a way of going about things, and Technion absolutely does. And I'm very proud as a academic that 3 of my coworkers are on the faculty there at Technion, so I feel a connection that way. And also, at one point, Uri and I intersected in our fields and had some papers kind of going back and forth in a really fun way. So it just shows how rich the interconnections can be in these fields. But also, in my own trajectory, there was a moment where I was deeply impacted when I was an undergraduate at the University of Chicago. I studied in science, but that university has a deeply integrated way of doing things, and so I was immersed also in the humanities and the social sciences. And I know that's going to be a little bit of some of the questions. And so for me, the education that I received in the humanities in particular led me to thinking about what would be, in a sense, an examined life of dedication to service in various ways. And that led me to a series of different roles, both as a scientist and administrator, and ultimately now to this most recent position of president of the University of Chicago.
Hello, everybody. I mean, first of all, I want to say how wonderful it is to see everybody here in person. I guess I spoke with so many of you over Zoom over the past 2 years, and now I realize that you are 3-dimensional. You have legs, you have hands, so the height. Right. Yeah, we were actually yesterday we were speaking about it. I mean, you get an image of a person in Zoom, and then you meet him in reality, and not always the same. So thank you so much for first of all for supporting us for so many years, and for being here with us in this wonderful event. So how did I get here? That's by serendipity, by plane, right? I guess by serendipity, every one of us has a certain identity or a way he would like to think of himself. So my identity is a scientist. I mean, no doubt about it. I mean, that's what I have been doing for 30 years, and this is my core. But in around 2000, nanotechnology, I was working in nanotechnology, which is the science of small stuff, let's say. Let's define it this. Would you agree, Paul? Paul is, by the way, one of the founding fathers. So in early 2000, it became clear that nanotechnology is going to turn into something major in future human technologies, with applications everywhere, in life science, in electronics, in optics, in medicine, in environment, sustainability. And at that time, actually the United States, China, Europe launched mega programs in nanotechnology. And I had a feeling at that time that unless we launch something similar in Israel, we'll stay behind. So together with some colleagues, we have initiated initially something at the Technion, which turned into the Russell Berry Nanotechnology Institute. And those of you who attended yesterday the reception had the chance to meet Angelica Berry, who was really central in that effort. So we started the Russell Berry Nanotechnology Institute at the Technion. I've headed it for a number of years, but that also kind of turned on a wave throughout Israel. Other centers in the Hebrew University, Uri Banin was heading that, was established, Tel Aviv University, essentially all research universities, and then also the government picked it up, and it became a national effort that transformed Israel. I have to say it transformed Israel in terms of our capacity to do nanotechnology, which now you can find everywhere. It's everywhere, and we were able to educate thousands and thousands of graduate students, build the infrastructure, and facilitate the industries or help industries grow into this field. So that was my experience. And then I ended my term in 2010, and it was very natural for me to go back to the lab. So I went back to the lab. And then in 2017, I was called to establish the National Program in Quantum Science and Technology, which I did. And then I was approached. People asked me to run for the current position. And I had a feeling that it was clear, and I guess it will come up very clearly in this discussion, that the academic world is undergoing major changes. And they didn't start with the virus. I mean, the trends that we see now, for instance, like distant learning, etc., it started much earlier. We are, I would say, in a very special point in time as far as academic education is concerned. Universities have been teaching almost the same way for 800 years, since Bologna University or something like that. But now it is changing, and it is changing dramatically. Another aspect that kind of drove me there was the fact that the whole ecosystem with industry, and I guess we'll elaborate on that, is also changing. So these are times of dramatic changes, and I simply was ready to try and cope with that challenge. Time will tell how successful we are. But that's what brought me here, I guess, to this chair.
That's wonderful. And many of the themes you brought up we're going to be revisiting. So thank you for that introduction. Jeannette.
Thank you, Susan. I am going to make 3 points. First, a very personal reason for why I'm here is that I am the proud advisor of Greg Morrisett. When we were at Carnegie Mellon together, he was my PhD student. And so when Greg asks me to do anything, I will say yes. And that shows how deep the student advisor relationship is when you're in the doctoral program. So that's one point I wanted to make. With respect to why I am where I am, and this will relate to my third point, I have, as Susan mentioned, worked in academia and the government and industry, but I am a hopeless academic. And what that means is I stand for the values of academic freedom, pursuit of knowledge, and for research, long-term basic science and engineering and everything that academia stands for. So that's what I mean by I'm a hopeless academic. It's not about bottom line for me. It's not about bureaucracy and rules and regulations. Now, the third reason I'm here is perhaps the most important. When I was asked to be on this panel and I saw the topic of this panel, how higher education has to change in this changing environment, I thought this is a perfect opportunity to share with all of you how we at Columbia University have been thinking about this question for many years now, pre-COVID. And I'm going to use language that still is being defined. But at Columbia, let me back up. In academia, for the most part, faculty and what we do as a university is evaluated by education, research, and service. Service to the community, service to our profession. At Columbia, we talk about a fourth purpose. And it really is getting to the heart of what you were saying. We need to revisit higher education's role in society. And so it is with this in mind that, starting with President Bollinger a few years ago, he's been advocating for fourth purpose. Of course, faculty members have no clue what he means by fourth purpose, but it's the fourth purpose. The best way I can explain, I'm going to try to explain in two ways. The first way is by analogy. We, like many other universities, have a phenomenal medical school. And in our medical school, we have basic scientists who do immunology, neurology, and so on. But we also have clinicians, and all within the same organization. And so what happens is you take your basic science, and you immediately can translate it into helping patients. So the analogy is, why can't the rest of the university act that way? Take your basic research results and be more impactful to the community, to society, and not wait 10, 20, 30 years as typically you need to wait for research results. So we call this knowledge to action or directed action. We really don't have a good term for this, so we call it fourth purpose. And it's so key to how Columbia sees not just the future of Columbia, but the future of academia, the future of higher education, that we actually just named a vice provost for the fourth purpose. But I wanted to say it's not just Columbia or President Bollinger's idea. There's something in the air. And my best example is the newest announcement from the National Science Foundation, which is the creation of a new directorate called Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. And this is the first directorate that the NSF has created in 30 years. It is a fourth purpose directorate. So there's something in the air, and I would love for a dialogue on this particular topic. It's a little higher level than how did COVID affect the classroom, but I think this is so important to have a dialogue about how the role of academia for society and how higher education needs to change to reflect the changing environment. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeannette. Jeannette always has a way with words. For those of you who are aware of the concept of computational thinking, which has really led to, before data science, she was the one who authored that original article. So thank you, Jeannette, for the fourth dimension. Craig.
Thanks, Susan. And now you can see why I picked my advisor. The original question is, how did you get here? And it's because of people like Jeannette. So I was very fortunate as an undergraduate to get involved with research my freshman year. And I actually did a startup when I was in high school and thought that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go into business. I wanted to use computation. PCs were coming out at the time. I wanted to revolutionize the world the way Bill Gates was doing, people like that. But in the college environment, I had a professor who reached out to me and invited me into his laboratory and got to work over the summer. And it was transformative. Being able to think about challenges and problems and work on it in a research environment, but one-on-one with the professor was really life-changing. And so I went to graduate school, and I was very fortunate, but also enamored with the faculty at Carnegie Mellon, and sort of pattern matched on role models there who very much took the opinion that students were first class, that they were there to be nurtured, shielded, like my advisor never brought up funding issues or things like that. They was always go off and explore what you think is important to explore. And that support was just marvelous. When I got to be an assistant professor at Cornell, similar support from people like Bob Constable or Uris Hartmanis, who were giants in the field, but were putting part of their career on the line to nurture junior faculty and to make sure that they were successful, and made sure you had grants and funding, but also took you aside when you were out of line and gave you the appropriate speaking to. They were really mentors and guides in that stage of my career. And it dawned on me that they were taking time out from their labs, from their passions and so forth to help me out. So as I sort of matured, that was one of the things that I wanted to do, was give back to other faculty and students. And so that's how I found myself in administrative roles. It doesn't come naturally, I think. Most academics would prefer to be in the lab and so forth, but they value that fulfillment that you get from helping students or helping colleagues. So that's ultimately how I ended up in an administrative role at Harvard. Actually, the other thing that motivated me was it was either me or someone else, and I was terrified that the someone else would end up leading something, and that it would destroy the culture of the place. And actually, academic culture is very distinct to even departments and schools and so forth, but it's the hardest thing in the world to build and maintain, and yet is so important for the livelihood, especially in fields like technology. You can go off and triple your salary compared to working in academia. So why do you do this? You do it because of that fulfillment, the freedom to explore, but also because of the colleagues and the environment. So if you have a great environment, a great academic environment, then you want to stay in that. And as an administrator, you're trying to create that culture and that sense of wonder, excitement, the future, and so forth. You could hear it from the previous panel, like Wendy is one of my favorite colleagues because she's always got this positive view of where the world is going. And that's infectious. So anyway, that's how I found myself in this particular role.
Thank you, everybody, for such nice entrees into the topics for today. I do commit to finishing by 12:40 so that you guys can ask questions. So I'm sure that this panel has a lot to say, so we will just cut back to make sure we have time to answer your questions. I'd like to start with, has education changed? And if so, how? The students, the teaching mode. Tell me a little bit about your perceptions on that. And you can go in any order you want. You can jump in and cut each other off. That's fine.
I'm going to jump in here because, forgive me for doing this, but I'm going to respond a little bit to what Jeannette threw down as that excellent way of thinking, that fourth dimension. And I will connect to this topic of the students and how their education is changing as well. I've just come in new to this role at a university I love very much. It's where I was educated myself. And so I'm, 6 months in. But even before I arrived into the role, and Uri, it was very much analogous to what you were thinking about and what Jeannette just mentioned. It was obvious, and I think it is to all of us, that the nature of the university is evolving in a deep way. And so at our university, we have a certain style. It's a very powerfully academic style, if you know the place. It's a life of the mind kind of place. The desire to understand deeply is ingrained, and it has a form of integrated thinking. Our students are taught all the different modes of thought: humanistic, social science, mathematical, physical, computational, biological. And that's part of an undergraduate education, and that permeates the place. It's also a place where freedom of expression is deeply valued and practiced, I think, in a quite deep way. And that requires some very careful thinking also about how to build in diversity and belonging into it. So those are kind of the core style that you would say, okay, I could have been there 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, and that's what would be there. But as I've arrived, and the language that I'm trying to use to describe just what you were talking about, it's been to talk about the engaged University of Chicago. And I have found in my visits around that great university how much desire there is amongst students and faculty and staff and friends of the university for this ability to think in this way, to be harnessed to the benefit of society in a more determined way than we have in the past. And a sense that we can do that, we can preserve that core piece of what it is to be a great university, while at the same time becoming a different, I'm going to call it a topology, if I may. If you look at our university, the historic university is a neo-Gothic core. And it's in a giant set of quads. And if you're in that building, you look into the quad. You look in. And people practiced that. They were thinking about ideas inside the university. But if you actually explore the geography of the university as it is today, you could never find its boundary. There are little pieces that are all over. And in a sense, that's what's happening. There are parts of society, corporate foundations, community organizations that are all intermingled with our university. And they're in, and they're changing us, and we're interacting with them. And there's a global dimension to this. We are now connected in other places, and we have a style, but there are other universities that have different approaches. And when we partner with them, we're able to do things that are stronger. So all of those are part of what's emerging as a really different structure inside universities. And you know who's leading this? It's the students. I mean, just to give you an example around education, before I even got a chance to start in the role, but I had been announced, the student government, both undergraduates and graduates, they came and they said, we must meet with you on Zoom now. So I get on Zoom, and after years at Berkeley, I figured this is going to be fun. And I go in, and they had totally prepared, and they only wanted to talk about one thing: climate and energy. They were very well prepared. They knew exactly what the university was doing. They didn't have a lot of regard for it, and they wanted to move things. And that tells you that the world of education is changing, because those students, they see the world changing around them. They want that deep education. They really want it, but they want it for a purpose, and they want it to give meaning to their lives. And they insist that we, as institutions, become places where we are vectors of engagement, and we are helping them to go on that journey. And there are many dimensions to how that's changing how we teach. And that's, I think, part of what we'll really get into here and have a real discussion on.
I love this visual of the university not looking inward, but looking outward and having so many arms into the world. And at many universities, you now find research labs that industry is also coming into the campus so that it's very much more engaged. But I wanted to leave the other panelists. Uri, go.
Yes, well, you know, while you were speaking, I was trying to reflect on the Technion. And I mean, you are absolutely true about the students and the need to address societal needs and environmental needs and so on and so forth. But I have to say that our starting point is slightly different in the sense that the Technion was established, it was conceived half a century before the State of Israel, and it opens its gates quarter of a century before the State of Israel. So in a sense, the fact that the Technion preceded the state imprinted its DNA. And its DNA is such that it is an organic part of the state. You know, if I had to define our mission, then obviously we would like, I mean, we are trying to do the best research we can do. We are trying to give our students the best education, societal responsibility, environmental responsibility, but supporting the State of Israel, supporting its economics, supporting its defense needs, etc. It's part of the university's DNA. In that respect, we are very tightly integrated into society. I believe that we are also perceived as part of the society. Now, obviously, the needs are changing, and sustainability is probably one, if not the challenge now that we need to address, and human health is there, and so on and so forth. So, but for us, it's kind of we don't have to change our DNA. We have to change our focus. And well, it is challenging, of course. We work very hard on that. And you're absolutely right about the students. I mean, they drive us. Now, another thing is, which is becoming very clear, I mean, there used to be this borderline between industry and academia, applied research in industry, fundamental research at the university, education in the university. And so this line is totally gone. I mean, it's totally blurred. There is fantastic fundamental research being done in industry, not only in computer science, by the way. I mean, for instance, quantum technologies, quantum computation is another example. I mean, it's at the forefront of physics, research in physics, but those computers are being made by companies in collaborations and so on and so forth. So the ecosystem, the whole ecosystem in which universities operate beyond what our students are driving to, but the whole ecosystem is changing. And you were mentioning, I mean, you were asking about that change. When I studied more than 30 years ago, so many years ago, the professor was almost a sole source of information. You also had the textbook. You could read the textbook, and then there was the professor. But today, students, I mean, they consume their information elsewhere. They don't need us for that information. And this is a change, as I mentioned, it's an historical change. For 800 years, it was different. And now, we are no longer information providers. So what are we then? And Greg mentioned mentorship. So perhaps we should turn more into mentors than to source of information. How do you do that on large scale?
Exactly.
That's a challenge. I mean, working with a mentor on a one-on-one basis, that's one thing, but how do you do it with 15,000 students? So we are facing really dramatic challenges. I'll be happy to describe some of our ideas later, but I think I'll stop here.
Completely with you. That whole idea of mentorship is a wonderful one. And how do I do that when I'm teaching 350 students? I can't even get to know the names of my TAs, let alone the students. So scaling, I think, is a huge, huge challenge, and I find it amazing that I'm a computer scientist, and the mere question of how do I scale my teaching is so difficult. But I wanted to make sure that Greg or Jeannette had more to say about the fourth dimension.
Thanks. It's not that it's a defined term or anything, but President Bollinger calls it fourth purpose. Sorry. You can call it fourth dimension, though.
Thank you.
I remember being at an SF, and we were doing some kind of cybersecurity something or other, and we had the fifth dimension, cyberspace with the fifth dimension. Anyway, what I wanted, I really liked your comments, so I wanted to make a couple of points based on what was said already. And also add another role that I think professors can have for students in this very high-tech world. So first, I wanted to mention that very much so this, and I know this perhaps it's not about students, but it's about industry, very much so, as you mentioned in quantum and certainly in computer science and AI, the collaboration and partnership between industry and academia really, I think, is changing and has to change in new ways. And at least in the United States, we have not really found good models of collaboration. There are these walls, the lawyers come in, they talk about IP, everyone runs away. And at the same time, when I was at Microsoft, I could see that industry was ahead of academia. And I said, what are those academics doing anyway? Like, what are they using that NSF money for? But industry needs academia. Academia produces the talent. We train our students to be versatile, to learn how to ask questions, to do fundamental research. But more importantly, academia is the only place where one can do long-term basic research. In the end, unless a company is a monopoly and has megabucks from some, parent, eventually a company will have to think about the mission of the company, the bottom line, the business value, even of basic research. And I have witnessed this in my own time at Microsoft. So academia has a very unique, important role in society. And it's about producing ideas and producing talent. And it's an ecosystem. Academia, government, and industry all need each other to cultivate that innovation ecosystem. So that's really important. But I do feel that in certain areas like quantum and AI, we need to figure out how industry and academia can partner in more productive ways. So I don't actually have an answer to that. It would be nice to hear your answers. I think NSF's new directorate is actually struggling with that question. The other point I wanted to make had to do with this mentorship, because many years ago, do you remember MOOCs? Okay, so I remember when MOOCs first hit, and we all thought this was the demise of higher education. All of us were going to, and professors were going to disappear because MOOCs were going to take over teaching. And I reflected back at the time, I thought, well, I must I must have a purpose in life. There must be some value that I bring to the classroom. And I was thinking also about the K through 12 teachers, because the internet is available to anyone who can do an iPad. So I thought one role that teachers continue and still play in terms of mentoring students and working with students is judgment. And I think this is especially important in this day and age of fake news. And yes, we can go to the internet and find out lots of information, but we need to help our students process that information and to understand logical thought, basic math and science, just some basics, so that they can analyze this information and discern for themselves what's right and what's wrong, or what's real and what's not. That's just one idea I have, and that's teaching them good judgment. So I'll stop there.
Great, put me last. The fourth dimension or purpose, engagement, I completely agree with this. In fact, one of the things that we did when we set up Cornell Tech was added engagement explicitly as part of the hiring and tenure and promotion goals. And so every year we're asking our faculty, how are you engaging outside your scholarly community? And part of that is back to the Technion's DNA. We inherited a lot of that in that we were set up to impact New York City and to help with the tech ecosystem here. And so having that clear mission of helping the city and having that goal in terms of creating jobs, but also helping with municipal challenges, whether it's in the urban tech space or health tech or other things. These are things that give us fulfillment, beyond our scholarly communities. But all the focus, for example, around sustainability is an example of a wicked hard problem that universities should be leaning into. And I think Jeannette put her finger on what is even more wicked and harder, which is really information and that landscape. And fundamentally democratic institutions, that they've been undermined by the rise of various technical platforms, social media and other things. They've undermined our trust in government institutions and in the universities. And part of the way that we regain that trust is through engagement, through this fourth purpose. And I'm hopeful as well that we can do that without sacrificing the things that the Academy is really good at in terms of long-term research and education, knowledge creation. As was said, the information is readily available, but the students need help and guidance in parsing it, in extracting real knowledge from the information. And furthermore, it's become clearer and clearer as the internet sort of tied the world together how they need to be world citizens and understand perspectives beyond their own experience. And New York is a great place to educate students because they come from all over and they can see, just going out into the neighborhoods, people from all over the world. But they need a whole lot more guidance and structure than the traditional university experience has given them in terms of being world citizens. And so all those things are wrapped up, all connected to the things that everybody's saying before, that universities have this need to engage, in part for self-preservation, that if society continues to have an erosion of trust, they won't give us the privilege to do research and educate unless we really are giving back in a measurable and acknowledged way. But it's also exciting, to tackle real-world problems like sustainability, like misinformation. These are things that we can partner with industry and bring forward. But it takes expertise across the whole university, whether you need philosophers, you need social scientists, you need technologists and so forth to come together. That's the other big change that seems to be happening in universities, that it's not quite as siloed that it's not just a computer scientist, it's a computer scientist and a social scientist working together. One of my favorite examples here was a clinic that we set up with the mayor's office to end domestic abuse. It was really focused on cybersecurity, but we worked with social workers to understand the problems that abuse victims would have with their technology. They were being stalked by abusers, following them on their iPhones and so forth. We could provide technical expertise to help get rid of malware on their phones or their devices, but we actually had to go work with the companies, with Google and Microsoft and so forth, to change the way they were developing the technology to help these victims, because they didn't understand that, okay, it's great to be able to find your phone when you lose it, but it's also a great way to stalk somebody who's being, a victim. So, yeah, this is a complete rambling anecdote, but I think it really ties all the pieces together, that engagement and fourth purpose are really important, and that universities are adapting to that and have to, frankly, to survive.
Great. Well, you can see that this is a very lively panel who go off in whatever direction. So I'm going to just open it up to the floor for questions at this point, because I think that you've got these experts. So wherever the roving mic is, if we could go to the gentleman in the back, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. My name is Max Blankfeld. I went to the Technion in the early 70s. And since you're mentioning about the panel going into different directions, very lively, I hope you guys forgive me for my question, because I'm also going to take to maybe a direction that's not very easy to deal with. But in my opinion, the future of universities and research essentially goes to good students, good academicians, teachers, researchers, and money. And so we have here 5 universities, 4 American universities, 1 Israeli university, and that are at par in terms of the academic excellence and students. However, when you look at the endowments of the 4 American universities, they are upwards of $10 billion. The Technion, if I have it correctly, is under $2 billion. And if you look at tuitions at the 4 American universities, they are really, really high. And when you look at the tuition at the Technion, they are much more reasonable. So my question is there something else that the American universities can learn from the Technion?
I'm sure that there's a lot that we can learn from the Technion, but I think this is above my pay grade, so I'm going to pass it off to Paul.
Great. Yeah. I have a suspicion that I'm here with a group of people who do sort of work with market forces on a pretty regular basis, and I will say that, that in that sense, the education system here, I mean, if I look at what's happening at University of Chicago, people come to us because they learn how to think, not what to think. It's got great value for them for life. And it's been, just to say, I think the market realities of it in a sense that we'll this year have, well below 5%, admission rate. So, I mean, there's enormous demand, and it's working, and it produces very high quality. But what it doesn't do as well is scale for society. It doesn't scale as well for society. And I've just come from, a really great public university. Serves many more people, although even there, it doesn't scale for society. And so, I think that and I think even inside Israel for Technion, if you said 15,000 people, I mean, that's a lot of people by Israeli standards, but still, there are problems of scaling. And so I want to just, I don't mean to short circuit and not answer your question. There are things for us to learn very specifically from the Israeli universities that are very important. But I also want to point out one other thing. This conversation we've been having a little bit here has some history to it. our university was founded by a man named Harper as the first president and Rockefeller, together they did it. And when Harper founded it, he actually, I think, had in mind what we would call today the engaged university. He was a truly visionary man. And he had it formed where on the first day, he created the university proper, the university extension. The extension had faculty riding on trains and going out and teaching people all across, that area of what was called the West at the time, and even had correspondence school, the online version. And he created something called the affiliates, university affiliates, that brought 160 educational institutions into partnership with the University of Chicago. So he was trying to think about the problem of scaling to get to impacting large numbers of people, and recognized that there were different roles for the different levels, but they had to be in cooperation with each other. And that was lost. The university lost that and looked inward much more. And I think what we see now is that we're in a period of profound change where we're interconnecting. So not only would we like, for example, to partner with, with our peer other institutions here closely, or other global partners, but we'd also like to have stronger relationships with, Chicago State University that's serving a very different, or the community colleges and so on, and make deeper partnerships to get to the kind of scaling, and which there'll be many cost models, some actually probably even, less expensive than Technion. So I think we have a different design problem in our society to solve that involves how these great research universities connect with the broader education of large numbers of other kinds of higher education institutions. That's how I see it.
I want to
Turn your mic on.
give an example of that. So CUNY here in New York is 250,000 students, 24 campuses, public university that is quite amazing. And we partnered with them around computer science education, looking at, for example, trying to get more women and people of color in the computing field. And there were a lot of best practices arising from the computer science community that we were able to work with the CUNY, 12 of the CUNY campuses, and managed to double the number of women majoring in computer science. So there are engagement activities like that I think the elite universities can play a tremendous role in. But the other one is a marketing thing around the costs of higher ed in the US are not quite clear to everybody. A place like Chicago or Columbia or Cornell, the cost of going to one of those places for students whose parents make under $100,000 is actually gone way down relative to where it was 50 years ago. And that's because essentially the high end is supporting the low end. And that's a change. If you went back to Harvard in 1950s, there were not a diverse group of students that were going there from all over the world, much less different socioeconomic strata. Today, you have a much broader range of students, and the sticker price is high, but the actual price that those students is paying has gone way down. So it's a little bit of a marketing thing that you have to dig into to understand the dynamics of it. Having said that, for middle-class families, it's still enormously expensive and is a challenge. And I think all of the institutions worry a lot about how to fund the middle America and the support for the middle class.
Is there another question?
I was taking a few notes while you were speaking. This is kind of a complicated question about the role of professors, teachers, academics, which I'm in the healthcare, surgical healthcare, and you talked about your role and the complexity of the data that students are being inundated with, internet and whatnot, and how you navigate the different tribes in the world that have beliefs. They read this, they read that, and you've got to be the one who puts it in perspective for them. It's very challenging, I think, in academic world. And I was just wondering if you can elaborate how you deal with the stubbornness of today's students, the diversity.
We consider ourselves, and I believe all of us, as institutions of higher education. And the word education is probably the most important component in that. So the question or the challenge, at least that we are trying to address, is finding ways how to help our students crystallize a broader perspective of life. So it's not just about knowledge. It's not even just about being able to evaluate what is true, what is not, which is, of course, important. But the real value of university education is giving our students a very broad perspective. So that later, because their education or their learning is not going to end up when they graduate. They will continue to learn, they will continue to consume information, professional careers, etc. And what we would like to give them are the right tools or sufficient tools to do that. And Paul has already mentioned, for instance, the importance of humanities. So the Technion is a technical university. It's an engineering school. But we are now developing a department for humanities. And this is not because we would like to develop broad research into humanities at the university, because we believe that having some background in humanities is important for engineers, because each one of them at some point along his career will be facing questions, technological questions or scientific questions, but all of those questions will have some bearing on society, some bearing on some ethical questions, some environmental questions, and so on and so forth. And this is far beyond after they graduated the school. And we would like to provide them with the best set of skills so that they can cope. That's one aspect which goes, it has to do with education. Another aspect, and in Israel, due to the mixed population and so on and so forth, it's a key issue for us, and that's diversity and inclusion. The Israeli society is polarized. I mean, Jews, Arabs, within Arabs, and so on and so forth. So one topic that we really invest heavily in is creating an inclusive campus and letting our students experience in interaction among the different, you may call them minorities, etc., figuring for themselves ways how to live together, how to communicate, how to share values, and so on. So this, again, it's you may call it education, it's tools for life, perspective for life. And I believe that the university, to a large extent, of course, we educate engineers. I mean, we give them the best background we can, but we perceive it much broader than that. We perceive it as helping them. We are not trying to crystallize some perception of life for them. We would just like to give them the tools so that they can do it for themselves and keep evolving after they graduate.
I wanted to add to this, and that is, much as was said before, it's about how to think, not what to think. And I think all of us really support that is what we're trying to educate our students on. And at Columbia, we have something that's very famous called the Common Core, where every single undergraduate has to learn philosophy, history, literature, art, music. Even if you're an engineer, you have to take these courses. And it's very, very intense. There's a lot of reading, there's a lot of writing. And I have witnessed even in my own family and students, the transformation that raw freshmen and freshwomen go through when they have finished these courses. They start seeing this broader perspective on life, on the world, on themselves, on their relationship with everyone else. That is what we can do in higher education. Expose our students to these broad perspectives.
Can I just add one friend? That's exactly, and also we're, at the University we have a core curriculum in that sense. And there's one thing I want to call out because I think it really goes to your question, and it also is part of the organizational design of universities that points out where we have some challenges. So what really matters in that core is, of course, interacting on these areas, all ways of thinking. But the piece that really I think is vital is that we have classes with about 16 to 20 students sit around a table like this. They've read the material and they really talk about it and they challenge each other and they learn how to engage in that dialogue and to hear the perspectives of others. That doesn't scale to a lecture hall. And that's not been very successful in all those years. I myself was trained at this, at a university that did things this way, and I will say that my humanities training at the University of Chicago taught me more about my science career than all of my science classes put together. Even though I learned content in those science classes, I was not asked to try to grapple with questions that don't have simple numerical answers. And so the lecture, and COVID, has exposed again that there are other modalities. And in the science areas and the engineering areas, we have struggled to create those kinds of learning environments that are comparable. And that's where you see a lot of experiments going on now, people suddenly trying different ways to teach in those subjects that will create that kind of ability to have creative thought and challenging of each other in the same way as is done in this other spectacularly successful area.
Great, thank you. I'd like one more question from, let's take this young lady, another young lady up front.
Kind of blown away that somebody would call me a young lady, but thank you. I'm glad I'm here. We were speaking earlier about the importance of digital health and the growth in that field. I wonder to what extent you're evaluating access to your professors, how you can digitally be more accessible and open to conversations and research and dialogue in a more, digital format.
Well, as in my own research group, which I still have one, a while back we started to use, the Slack platform. It's a platform that allows a small group of people to interact with each other regularly, and it did change how we interact in the sense that we could exchange and talk with each other a whole lot more. But it didn't alter the need for us to occasionally sit down one-on-one and really have a discussion about, how are you growing as a scientist and how are you doing that? But it is effective. There's not one answer to how universities are doing this. There are some, Arizona State's very famous for having established some, software tools that allow students to monitor how they're doing. I think they're a little formulaic. So, it's hard. I don't know if I have a simple answer. Maybe you do, Jeannette, or Uri.
Actually, I wanted to jump in because I do teach. If I can turn, I can't turn the mic on, but I can teach. So we were talking about scaling, and I'm able to teach a class of 340 students, but getting to know them is difficult. So some of the things that you can do is try to engage in small groups via Slack. And that works very well because it's a lot less overhead than people walking and having to meet up and all of the rest. So I actually think that we've learned from COVID that you can get to know people and communicate well in Slack or other, I'm not trying to promote Slack more than anything else. Any one of your platforms will work. But I think that there's ways of reaching more people digitally in these types of environments. And, the other thing I wanted to say is that with the chat facility that we have, if you're teaching digitally and people are chatting, students will chat more frequently, some students, than they would ask a question during class. And anecdotally, getting back to diversity, an African-American woman told me that she very much prefers this because she is not immediately identified as a minority. And so she's interacted with as an individual rather than as a minority woman. And I found this fascinating. It never occurred to me.
Right. I mean, obviously, distant learning, digital technologies are evolving very fast. And what COVID gave us is a proof of concept. The fact that at least technically we can communicate in that sphere. But the real question is, how much can we educate using these channels? How important is the personal encounter to the educational process, not to the teaching process? Teaching process is one thing, but to the educational process. So I prefer to pose your question just the opposite way. I believe that the challenge we're facing now at the universities is not only how to use the digital media better, but how to use the encounter times better. The time we spend together with our students, sitting with them, thinking together, arguing, and so on. Because it used to be very simple. We were just transferring knowledge to them, transferring information. But now this information is available to them. I mean, they can do it before the class or elsewhere, or a student at the Technion can listen to lectures from Stanford. And the real question, sorry, I became a politician, so I have this habit of saying that.
That was my question.
Yes.
Because I heard you say they can find information elsewhere. It was more the encounter, the discussion, the challenge.
Right.
How do you have something more meaningful interaction with a professor or with subject?
So in small groups, we know how to do that. To a large extent, mentoring in graduate school and so on does exactly that. And then there is a question of scaling, and it was already mentioned here. How do you do it with hundreds and hundreds of students? And I have to say, at least in my mind, we don't have yet answers to that. But we were teaching for 800 years in one way. So it's very difficult in 2 years to switch to something else. But this is the challenge, how to use the encounter times, the personal contact. By the way, not only between professors and students, also between the students themselves. And there are different approaches to this question. Some of them are older, like flipped class, etc. But now there is a growing number of, for instance, discussion rooms where students get together and discuss something among themselves and so on. Overall, it's a wonderful question, and at least I don't have yet a full answer to it. I can only say that it occupies us extensively. We have expanded, for instance, our unit for the advancement of teaching significantly, exactly trying to figure out those ways. And this is, by the way, why it is also so important to interact with each other, why those networks among universities are so important, because we are facing the same challenges.
Wonderful. So I think, am I out of time? Pretty much. But I want to just make sure none of the panelists have a closing shot that they wanted to, anything they wanted to say finally. I think we're good. Thank you.